I will prevent, and very easily, World War III, very easily. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will be settled quickly. I will get the problem solved, and I will get it solved in rapid order, and it will take me no longer than one day.
I'm Frank Vaughn. It's July 28th, 2025, and last night, as I'm wont to do, I checked on my kids. First, I went and I checked on my daughter, and then I went and checked on my son, who both were sleeping like angels. I was sitting there on the edge of my son's bed. Admittedly, I talked to him, hoping he would wake up so maybe I could steal a hug off him, but he decided to sleep through my conversation. As I watched him sleep and I looked around his room, I felt no small amount of pride in what it is his mother and I have created for his childhood and for our daughters. In my case, it's a much more peaceful experience, a much more settled experience than I had when I was a child. And I was thinking about how much effort goes into this and how it's such a tragedy that you pay taxes on the home that you live in. You pay income taxes, you pay sales taxes, you pay excise taxes. You can't even buy bottles of beer without paying taxes. You're taxed every which way to pay for this state. But you are largely left, aside from CCB, and there are some subsidies to encourage childbearing, but you're largely left with the liability and the responsibility of housing and food and toys and swimming lessons and all the other things that come along with raising a decent adult. And then the state will come along and take your sons, mainly your sons, but also your daughters, because we're an equal opportunity society, and send them off to war to die. Equal opportunity to have your kids sacrificed in a war you didn't want, a war you didn't create, and a war you may not agree with. And you might say, Frank, we don't have the draft in Canada. What are you on about? I'm going to show you a flurry of articles. My case for conscription in Canada. This from the Tyee. I'm not in love with the idea, but as a former draftee, I think we need it back. This from April 11th, 2025. This from the CBA National, the Canadian Bar Association. Conscription in Canada, mandatory military service ended here in 1945, but as take-up of it accelerates among allies, could this country follow suit? 6 June 2024. Canada has far too few soldiers. Here's a radical fix. Mandatory service. Chris Lambie, March 15th, 2025. The Western Standard. Could Canada face mandatory military service? Maclean's. Look at those proud soldiers. You know, it's interesting how, when propaganda needs fit, they can find pictures of nothing but white people. Isn't that interesting? You're getting inundated with diversity-filled ads showing you ridiculous setups, but every now and again they throw this at you. It's an interesting thing. How to make teens join the military. A national service plan can create an army of fit young citizen soldiers and get our lackluster forces into fighting shape. National poll finds majority of Canadians are opposed to military conscription if war breaks out, August 7, 2024. But you can bet your bottom dollar that when they decide to actually not just soft roll this out, because all of these articles are examples of prepping the public mind for when they actually try to do this. If they try to do this, it's up to them, right? We're ruled by a bunch of elites in this country. If you want to learn the history of the different elites that have ruled this country and how it's changed over time, you have to read Peter C. Newman's books. The Canadian Establishment. It's a 3-volume set. Kind of leaves off in the early 2000s, but you can get the picture and you can figure out why you're a resource colony now being gutted and sold off to the world. But you have to keep this in mind. When they decide to, they'll just generate polls that show the public agrees with it, just like they do with every other public cause. And they blare it throughout the state-funded media, which isn't just the CBC. All media in Canada, all mainstream media in Canada is now funded directly by the state. And the federal government itself spends millions of dollars on polls. And those polling houses are incentivized to generate the numbers that the government wants, as well as to make sure that they keep getting rewarded those lucrative contracts. So this Ukraine war that our government and the opposition, Her Majesty's opposition, Pierre Poilievre, and the government of Mark Carney and Jagmeet Singh, all of them unconditionally support, that several neocon pundits in Canada get on their podcasts from the safety of their houses, wearing their little suits, and talk about the necessity of fighting in Ukraine to the last man. None of them have any skin in the game. None of them have volunteered to go over there. And all of them seem universally opposed to the idea that Russia might actually have a valid national case for the intervention that they unleashed. That maybe, just maybe, there's national interests on both sides of the conflict, and it's not just a good versus evil narrative. One of the greatest sins in warfare is the adoption of a good versus evil narrative, whole hog, because oftentimes it's evil versus evil, and far more often it's just interest versus interest. The reason that we have to address this is who knows how long we are from that moment when Canada decides to kidnap your sons and your daughters, mainly your sons, because if you analyze what's happening in Ukraine right now in the war, it's sons that are dying. Kidnap your sons and send them overseas to die in a war that you didn't volunteer for. Trump reduces Russia-Ukraine deadline to just 10 to 12 days. He had named 50 days. Now it's 10 to 12 days. The U.S. president previously said he would impose new sanctions against Moscow if no deal was reached before early September. It's actually much more dire than that because we're talking about secondary sanctions. So any country that does business with Russia that the United States deems inappropriate will get slapped with sanctions in the form of tariffs and penalties or denial of access to the American market. And this is aimed, these secondaries will affect places like China and India disproportionately, the BRICS anchors. And you must realize that this won't actually work to dissuade Russia from abandoning its national interest or China from abandoning Russia. They can't. The harder we push, the closer they get. Pushing, we learned this lesson in the 1970s and the 1960s, that pushing Russia and China together, they're not natural allies. They don't naturally get along. They come together when they're pushed together by stupid people in the West, borrowing one of Trump's words, stupid people. He seems to love that word. Now he's one of those stupid people because he's turning into a neocon. Instead of delivering peace as he promised, he's delivering war. He's delivering arms. He's keeping the thing going. Now, you need to understand what war looks like, because I'll tell you about those suited neocons sitting behind their desks telling you this war is important. This is crazy to me. This is the Balkan Mapper. 160,000 subscribers. Posted this video one day ago. It's only got 31,000 views. The Balkan Mapper is just one of many YouTube channels where you can discover the truth about Ukraine that your mainstream media is not telling you. They're out of men. They've killed all their sons. Not just their sons. They've killed the fathers. Anybody from the age of 25 to 48 is being conscripted and thrown into this meat grinder. And you can watch every single day in real time people map the impending losses. The offensive on Pokrovsk. The fact of the matter is, when the Russians renamed the Pokrovsk front mere months ago, and everybody in the Western media laughed, and you might have missed it. I wouldn't forgive you for missing it because it was a moment in time. And the Ukrainians laughed at it, and the Americans laughed at it. They said that Pokrovsk will not fall for another 12 years. The Russians are set to take it. The Ukrainian front is collapsing. The reason that Trump is moving up his date is because Ukraine is about to experience the loss of the war. All the weapons in the world, all the arms in the world will not stop what's inevitably coming, which is a big Russian breakthrough. There's only one thing that can stop it. That's direct confrontation with the West, which Trump seems to be letting himself be led directly into. Now, I'm just going to go back to this for a minute, because I can't show you, but I can tell you that if you watch enough of these videos, what's going to end up happening is you're going to be introduced to YouTube channels which will show you day by day the actual individual battles. And you're going to get to see the cold and heartless way that men are being fed to this meat grinder, dying by drone strike, dying by explosions, grenades. It's like the men are secondary in the conflict now. It's all about missiles and drones. There's no man-to-man combat, very little of it. They're all just being sacrificed. And for what? For what? A failure to recognize what happened in 2014, the coup in Ukraine, Western meddling, the cultural erasure of Russian-speaking peoples in the East that was happening before the Russians invaded. It's not to take purely the side of Russia, but you have to understand that there's a backdrop. There's a long history that led towards this conflict. And Trump, like just about every other Western leader, is failing to acknowledge that history, failing to acknowledge the complexity of the situation. And think about this. At the beginning of the conflict, as well as at other points along the way, peace deals were on the table that the Ukrainian side was ready to sign. That's very key. Ukraine was ready to sign, but the West intervened and said you can't sign. Now the situation on the ground is much worse. And the deal that the West could have achieved, because it is the West, this is their proxy war, this is our war. This is not Russia's war. This is our war. We brought it to this. Anybody telling you otherwise is full of baloney. They're ideologists. They're not telling you the truth. We did this. We brought it to this. And the deal that we could have got at the beginning was much better than the one we can't get now. The reality on the ground is Russia's winning the war. The meat grinder fuel that is the Ukrainian population is just about run its course. And it is such a human tragedy. And Western leaders want to float the idea of kidnapping my son and sending him off to die at some future point, or your sons. If your children are unfortunately of the age where they would be drafted, what are you going to do with that information? How are you going to handle that situation? I have some answers for myself. It's not going to be pretty for anybody. Another concern that I have is that Trump is desperate to change the channel on Epstein. And I don't know why. I don't know why he doesn't just face it head on. Is it because he met Melania under Epstein's watch? I mean, I don't know. I don't think he's guilty of the most heinous things that Epstein is charged with. But this cover-up, releasing the Martin Luther King files, many of the other distractions that are being thrown at us really quick, and they're important things. I shouldn't say they're distractions. I mean, that Clinton and Obama officially created the fake Russia narrative and the Steele dossier. These are things that actively sought to undermine the duly elected incoming president. They're really important things. I just question the timing. I just question this cover-up of Epstein, and I think I know why. It is contrary to U.S. interests in the Middle East and in Israel, and that's why the cover-up. Epstein was an intelligence asset working on behalf of Israel and the United States. To a lesser degree, the United States. Somehow, between the two, Israel's the senior partner and the United States is the junior partner. And anybody who identifies that is automatically labeled an anti-Semite. But if they were engaged in doing these evil, absolutely evil things that Epstein's guilty of, we should know. And we shouldn't be letting it go. Further to the United States, the U.S. slaps 20% anti-dumping duties on Canadian softwood lumber BC to be significantly affected in latest broadside from U.S. government on Canada's lumber industry. The CBC loves to paint the picture that we are hapless victims in an assault by the brutal orange man, the dictator of the United States, even though he's duly elected. It's ridiculous. Canada takes full advantage of the United States, and we have for a very long time. And it's actually terrible the way that we behave, considering we're an inferior nation. I actually wrote something to that effect on Twitter. Let's go over to Twitter for a second. And I'll just read you the tweet. The thing Canadians need to understand is that no one cares about Canada. We are not a respected power, nor even a power. We are not to be reckoned with. Our elites have reduced us to a flag of convenience or inconvenience to be used or discarded like a moth-eaten t-shirt. Now, the flag of convenience or inconvenience, that's an impartial quote from Peter C. Newman. I had to adapt it to my own causes, which is why it's not in quotation marks. But the fact of the matter is, the flag was a symbol of terrorism, according to our government in 2022 and 2023. Displaying the flag was a red flag in their public pronouncements. And that's the way it remained. Too much national pride meant you were a radical right-wing extremist. But then along came the election campaign that we were all just forced to go through. And it was all elbows up. It was all Canadian flags. It was all nationalism and patriotism until the election was done and the selected man, Mark Carney, won the thing. And then it all disappeared. They all went on vacation. The emergency was over. And Parliament was sent home. And they're still home. And they're still home for another 2 months. Meanwhile, the government, which is not Parliament, I know I'm repeating myself, but I have to. The government is not Parliament. The governor is the cabinet. The government's the prime minister. And more importantly, the government is the governor general. They can spend hundreds of billions of dollars without a single act of Parliament being passed, which they are doing. And they are negotiating with the United States right now and running into a brick wall. Now, to finish with this point, Canada is the greatest inferiority complex that's ever had a jumbo jet-sized chip on its shoulder. And we show that when we do things like this guy, MAGA-affiliated musician, takes stage east of Ottawa after NCC pulls permit. This is like the targeting of Elon Musk because of his association with Donald Trump, which backed off as soon as Musk and Trump had their spat. Canada is such a bully. We're such a little bully, too. We're a little short bully. And we're taking pot shots at everybody around the world. We absolutely rely on the assumption of peaceful relations among Western nations in order to get away with the garbage that we generate in this country in terms of having such a high opinion of ourselves versus every other nation in the world, especially the United States. And most of the Americans I talk to, they don't get it. They don't understand why Canada has such beef. They defend us because we've denuded our ability to defend ourselves. We rely on their capital coming in excess of the capital we send them to prop up our economy. We charge them exorbitant tariffs, which nobody ever tells you about in the mainstream media, and your government doesn't tell you about it. How we charge them through the nose. And then we spit all over them the entire time. We're so ungrateful. It's disgusting behavior. You wouldn't tolerate it. It's narcissistic. It's like a national narcissism. It's like national sociopathy. It's like we have no ability to reason or even feel the effects of our own actions on the world. And now we take this guy. We're so proud. It's national news. This guy just wants to come in and sing some songs like a million other artists. But it's national news how he was pushed out of a venue. And then he set up another venue. And they came after that venue because they didn't have a permit. And they smoke bombed him and they targeted him. And the national news doesn't condemn it. They show it to you. They amplify it. Again, it's the chip on our shoulder. because we have an inferiority complex. Canada used to be a great nation and a contending power. We're members of the G7, and yes, I know there was an idiot, and that's what he is. I hope he's watching. You're an idiot, who countered my post by calling on Grok. Let's actually see if we can find it. I hate this stuff. It drives me nuts. This person said, "You're so wrong, sir," and their top post is that the BC Lions need a quarterback, which is why I quoted it back to them. Now, where is this fella? There's a guy somewhere in here. There's too many. I've lost control of it. There's a guy who's just like, Grok, write a counter to this post. And so Grok does, because Grok will do whatever you want. Grok will completely invert facts to serve your purposes if you command it to, because Grok is a tool. It's a thrall of the human that's using it. And it bothers me every single time I see somebody just default to Grok. Your brain is shrinking. Your neurons aren't firing. You're not thinking for yourself. Grok is ruled by you. Your opinions, your thoughts shouldn't be substituted out for whatever Grok is saying, because Grok is nothing without you. Do you understand that? That's another insidious aspect of AI. Without humans feeding AI, AI knows nothing at this point. That may change, maybe in the not too distant future, but for now, humans guide AI. It's our thoughts and opinions that steer AI. It's our commands. And then you default to it as a counter to something that's very real, which is the decline and fall of Canada as a national sovereign. Sure, we host G7 meetings. That was what AI brought out. We hosted them. That means we're powerful. We're not even a G7 nation anymore. Our economy's fallen to 9th in the world. We're being replaced. We're being usurped. And our role, and this is the thing, we have to go back to this lumber thing. The U.S. economy. Okay, well, we'll do this. We'll do it this way. The U.S. economy is thriving in spite of tariffs. Will it last? There were predictions. If we go over, we'll see TD. And here's all their phone numbers, too. Isn't that interesting? This is November 6, 2024. Markets brace for higher inflation and interest rates under President Trump. All the predictions were that the U.S. economy would fall apart as tariffs got rolled out around the world. And what has happened is that it's been quite resilient. And in spite of the headlines that you may be seeing about the price of things in the United States and inflation rising, they zoom in on a very narrow window when Trump came into office to show that inflation is back at highs. But if you zoom out, you see that inflation got to those highs under Joe Biden, and things are actually flat. So in spite of everybody predicting the wheels would come catastrophically off the bus, everything's still ticking on in America. But more important to this video, the United States and the European Union just cut a deal. And they're going to avoid their trade war. They've agreed to do things a certain way with each other, and that's just the way it is. Canada now stands alone, you could argue maybe with China, but I think, I think there's a couple geopolitical concerns that probably warrant their own video. China's a complicated issue, but the Americans are getting their way on certain things when it comes vis-a-vis China, which is putting pressure on Canada, by the way. This pressure to deal with fentanyl, to deal with the drug production, to deal with the drug trafficking, that was guided by China and has been guided by China in Canada, to a lesser extent also Mexico. But Canada became a northern narco state largely because of the machinations and the wishes and desires of much more powerful sovereign nations. And now we're in a bit of a spot. And the EU has put us in an even greater spot, because just like they did with Trudeau in the first term of Trump's presidency, that idiot, that narcissistic sociopathic failure, which is all he is, would fly over to Europe, he'd have a few drinks, he'd get bubbled up, and the European leaders, who are, if nothing, very shrewd, would say, you know what? You're an important guy. Tomorrow you should deliver the press remarks, and you should tell the United States, deliver the message. We'll present a united front. And Trudeau walked out, and he did the job. And as soon as he was back in Canada, the United States and the EU cut their first deal back then, left us completely floundering and alone, made Justin Trudeau look like a fool. Now, it's a little bit more sophisticated. the Europeans and the financial class and the New Yorkers. They sent Carney to Canada. They sent him here. As far as I'm concerned, rigged Liberal leadership vote was a farce. I think the election itself was largely real, although there was a lot of interference, and we can prove that. I think Canada really did this to itself, by and large. So Carney's now prime minister. The European man. Now when he's done, he will never suffer. He'll never miss a meal. He'll be welcome in Europe. He'll be welcome back in New York. And he can take on the role of maybe being another central bank head. Mark Carney's always going to thrive. You, on the other hand, you'll be left holding the bag, just like you are right now. So all the elbows up, tough talk rhetoric, just pissing off the Americans, and all the tough talk of replacing the United States with European trade, which is an impossibility. We've been at it for 10 years. 10 years. We can't do it because it's not geopolitically possible. It makes no sense. Proximity to the United States means that America is our primary market. But there's been all this talk and rhetoric. Well, now the EU has once again left Canada out in the cold. And every indicator seems to guide us towards the conclusion that we're not going to have a trade deal August 1st, and tariffs will finally kick in, which, by the way, most of the tariffs that have been talked about haven't kicked in. This trade war that most of Canadians have been whipped up about. It's so funny. The Canadian citizen got whipped up into a fervor about trade war, about elbows up and all this nonsense during the election. After the election, Parliament went on vacation, government's functioning in the background, not much has been happening. The housing emergency, where's the 5,000 houses a day that Mark Carney promised? They were never going to happen anyway. They're not going to happen. Or there'll be CCAN homes built by Brookfield. It's incredible that Canada bought it in the first place. But in the meantime, leadership has effed off. They're gone. They're on holiday. And their base, rather than realize they've been had, is still floundering around trying to put together boycotts and avoiding travel to the United States and engaged in all this nonsense. The pain hasn't even started yet. And it's self-inflicted. It's this inferiority complex combined with an overinflated ego and the world's biggest chip on our shoulder. We're a national narcissistic crisis moving forward through time. It's not just our political leadership. It's a huge portion of the Canadian public is totally bought in. And speaking of things that the Canadian public loves to ignore, headline news about the sentencing of Barber and Tamara Lynch. Frequent jail sentences. We're talking about 7-8 years for them. They counseled people to commit a crime in Ottawa because the poor Ottawa citizens, as people who live in the nation's capital, just couldn't handle the fact that the country was angry. I mean, if you live in the nation's capital, what do you expect? That's where stuff's going to happen. You got a whole big country. You can move somewhere else. Have all the quiet in the world, but you decided to live in Ottawa. But anyway, they got the judiciary and the government on their side, so whatever. This trial's going on. This is just one example, okay? This isn't something that CBC bothers to cover. This isn't something you see in the national media, but it happens dozens of times. I'm actually having a hard time containing myself. I'd really like to yell about this. That's what my heart is telling me to do. But I'm trying to be calm. But it's infuriating. Dozens of times a day, this happens in our country with no media fanfare whatsoever. This is just an example. Male shoots bow in direction of officers after telling police to shoot him. Upon arrival, the male it doesn't even matter. All you need is released with future court date. Dude shot a bow at cops, trying to engage them physically, and he's back out on the streets so he can do it again. Dozens of times a day. Sometimes dozens of offenses, violent offenses, and they're just turned loose on your streets. Meanwhile, people's lives were turned upside down and inside out. Emergencies acts were issued. What Freedom Convoy person committed an act of violence in Ottawa? What law, what criminal law was actually broken? The streets became far safer under the so-called occupation than they were without it. Because of this nonsense, the presence of lawful people just trying to defend their bodily autonomy and their ability to earn and feed their families, sacrificing greatly to come to Ottawa to tell and deliver that message, their mere presence reduced criminality to zero. Isn't that amazing? Because of this, criminality rages in our cities because of our loose bail conditions. I used to be a very proud Canadian, even when I shouldn't have been. I spent money on a flagpole, and I kept the flag. Sometimes it would get a bit tattered, but I'd replace it on an ongoing basis. I remember the last time I lowered that flag. And I can tell you that now, years later, I'm not a proud Canadian anymore. I fly one flag. It's the Saskatchewan flag. Because I still believe that in the western part of this country, there's a kernel of sanity. But I'm afraid that our political leadership is giving it away because they're too afraid. They just don't have the vision. They're not thinking outside the box. Canada is a tough place for people who just want to build things and prosper. It's getting harder and harder. The electric vehicle mandate is coming. They're not looking to repeal it. They're talking about phasing out your internal combustion engine, and Mark Carney's on the record in his book saying that he wants to do it even faster than they're talking about doing it. It is national suicide. Why are we staying on a sinking ship? Why aren't we trying to consider all options? This man is leading us into a $100 billion deficit. This man is leading us into a trade war with the United States to protect a few cartels here in Canada. This man is sent here to keep carving us up to China and the European Union and the United States. Everybody else is winning. Canadians lose. When are we going to start engaging with a completely different set of ideas? Another one, I was going to cut right there, but actually, we got to go back. I can't stop myself. We got to keep going. Trudeau radically overhauled the Senate. Will Carney keep his reforms? Now, this is state media. This one's really infuriating. New government weighs changes to appointment process. Now, get this, India. Get into your head how this has been written up. Former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau upended 150 years of Canadian parliamentary tradition when he dumped Liberal senators, named independents to the upper house, and generally stripped the place of partisan elements. Are you fucking kidding me? The experiment produced mixed reviews with some old guard senators, those who were there well before Trudeau, arguing the Senate is now irrelevant, slower, less organized, and more expensive. The Senate was always irrelevant because the only thing of relevance is cabinet and the governor general. And this government, along with Trudeau, instead of hiding it, they're doing it openly now because they believe, and they're right, that the Canadian public doesn't care. Overall, the Canadian public is so disconnected that they don't even care that they're being ruled as though this is a monarchy. Because it is a monarchy. It's a constitutional monarchy. The king may not give a damn about his realm to the degree that some people think. But the Carneys are able to manipulate the monarchy that we live in so that they can rule by edict, which they do. But this idea that Trudeau kicked out Liberal senators and then named independents, they're all still Liberals. They're just not officially called Liberals. And they don't tell you in the first two paragraphs that he stacked the Senate with radical appointees. These are not nonpartisan people. This isn't the chamber of sober second thought. It's been set up to rubber stamp whatever the Liberal agenda is. And God forbid the Conservative Party actually wins and does something. It's there to oppose their agenda as best they can and slow things down because they can do that indefinitely. Now, I should have maybe put this segment at the beginning of the video. I made a mistake in the last video when I was talking about the new visa fee, $250. A lot of Canadians are going to be exempt from that fee. If you read further down in the article, it talks about the circumstances where the exemption may apply. And though some people are going to face that new charge, the majority of Canadians, for the time being at least, should not face it. But I would like to highlight how this is one of those places of weakness where if we keep infuriating the Americans, they can start charging us for entry. They can change the dynamic of the relationship, as has already happened. How long can the biggest guy in the classroom take the insults and invective from the littlest guy in the classroom before the littlest guy is taught a painful lesson that, yes, supposedly we have the rule of law and it governs everything, even though I've highlighted on this channel how the rule of law in Canada doesn't really exist. It's a figment of our imaginations. We basically have revolutionary courts. We don't really have courts that enforce the letter of the law. They do political work as well. That there are underlying rules, the rules of the jungle, that govern the relationships between nations. How long can the little guy keep offending the big guy before the big guy gives him a slap? And that's what's happening to us right now. The other thing that was a little bit vague was when I was talking about the price of lumber, I was specifically talking about the price of OSB coming from a wholesaler and other types of particle board, production board that isn't just raw lumber, because somebody noted that the price of pressure-treated wood had gone up and, you know, they weren't really seeing it. I wasn't talking about lumber overall. I was just talking about OSB. Part of the reason I didn't do any videos this weekend, even though I kept on working, I didn't do any videos, was because I get burnt out, man. I get burnt out. You know, I do this. I turn down business opportunities on an ongoing basis. I can't believe how many people are willing to sponsor or do advertising for what I think is a relatively small channel. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Between YouTube and Twitter, there's 52 or 53,000 people and an unknown number of people who listen to the podcast. I know you're out there. You're probably listening now. I have no idea how many of you there are. I just know the podcast gets out there somehow by some magic of the internet. You know, you're doing things differently. It's an uphill struggle. You're fighting the algorithm. July's been, you know, I appreciate everybody that clicks the donate button, but it's been a slow month to this point. And, you know, it's like, I don't know, sometimes I get burnt out. You eat a lot of, you eat a lot of, I just want to swear. You take a lot of invective. Let's put it that way. You take a lot of invective. You get a lot of people writing you crass emails and making stupid comments. And I don't know, I think it was Thursday or Friday, a couple comments really got to me. They just kind of burrowed into my skull, and I was really aggravated off camera. Like I took it into the rest of the house, which I don't want to do, and I haven't done since I started making videos again, but it happened. And I thought, you know, in light of everything, I think I'm just going to not pressure myself this weekend to keep banging out content, but I kept working anyway. I kept learning, kept getting disappointed by the things I learned. And that's the way it is. But you never have to worry, for those of you who do. I'm not going anywhere. I like my life. I'm going to keep living for as long as I'm able to. And don't worry. I'm going to be here no matter what happens. I'm Frank Vaughn. I'll see you in the next one.